Good morning and welcome to the Loved and Sent meetup today in one of the last weeks of October. We're so excited to be joined by Pastor Jeff Cloeter, the author of the book Loved and Sent, also the chief strategist for how to really think about how to take all of that information and move it into not only his congregation, but yours as well. Jeff is the senior pastor of a multi-site congregation here in St. Louis, and we are so excited to have him join us again this morning. Welcome, Pastor Jeff.
Thank you. I've never had the title Chief Strategist, so thank you for adding that title. I don't know if that's my bio or not, but it is now.
It should be, because I think it's one of the things, every time I hear you speak, every time we have a conversation, it's one of the things that I walk away with is just how incredibly gifted you are at strategy.
Well, thank you for that. I'm going to tell my wife that. My wife will not call me the chief strategist of our home, but I'll tell her that, see what she says.
You can give her my text number. I'll back you up.
All right.
Well, welcome this morning. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about just the whole idea of rolling Loved and Sent out into your congregation. And so I thought it would be a really great time to go back to some of the basics of that, since now most of the churches are starting to really think deeply about Christmas and what's going to happen in all the congregations from now until the end of the year. But also what's got to be on a lot of people's mind is then 2024 and what are the goals and what are the plans that they're going to put into place. And I think that this is just a perfect time to again talk about Loved and Sent, and the beginning of the year is just a great time to think about launching that in a congregation. Let's see, it's at the very, very beginning, one of the things that you and your congregation did together was read the book and just kind of process through it. Question for you on how you did that. Did you start with just your staff first and then move it out into the congregation, or did you guys all just engage together?
Good question. And actually, our situation would be different because when we started talking about Loved and Sent, when we narrowed these words to be kind of our compass, there wasn't a book. And so it really started more organically. But I would say that the way in which we did it is transferable regardless. And so I just focus on that word organic. So in our context, even before there was a book, it doesn't matter if there's a book. The point is that it is a culture and a way of being. And so I would say for anybody watching or listening, I would operate the same way. And whether it's Loved and Sent or anything, I look at it as sort of tossing a pebble in a pond and the ripples go out. So I always start with a few. Who's the core? Who's at the center circle? And so when we were kind of wrestling with these words, God placed them on our heart. It was me talking with core leaders, some staff, maybe elders, formal and informal leaders of our church. And then the next ring out would be maybe small groups, and the next ring out, and the next ring out, all the way to a more formal sermon series. And so for those of you on right now or watching this, who are the core people that you would say, I want to just work through this with a few people more intimately, organically, naturally, because this isn't just a strategy or a sermon series. It gets to that eventually. That becomes sort of the outer circle where you're hitting everybody with it. But culture starts with a few. So who are the few that you start with? And then what are the circles after that, and work out in that order. So looking at this time of year, if you have time in the next 2 months, maybe I'm going to spend 2 months with a few people working through the book, working through the concepts and applying it to our personal lives. And what do you think about the life of our church? Then in the new year, you might expand it. Maybe we do some small groups work through it, and so on and so forth. Or maybe it's a bigger picture and you start in the new year with a small group, and that you're already looking to fall of 2024 as by then the whole church will be into it. I think if you don't need to rush it. It's patient. It's I've used the illustration before of an auger. You just keep turning the auger around and around, and it goes deeper with each turn. And so I would think now, just you don't have to do this all at once. You just kind of look at it over the long haul. How do you instill a culture and a way of being in your people?
That's great. That's really good. So, regardless of whether you're a very large church or a very small church, you're always going to have that core inner circle. And then you can decide how it's best in your context to move it out. You also are in a position of having two campuses for your congregation. So the inner circle, I'm assuming, would have included people from both campuses, but is that true?
Yeah. Yeah. And so in every context, you look at who is that core. And yeah, in our context, it maybe expands a little bit more. But I'd just encourage, like you said, Jane, there are varying sizes of churches you might be. You might see yourself as a medium, or maybe you're a small church. And especially if you're a small church, you might be disheartened and think, well, I don't have the resources. I don't have the people that I really need. But I think there's one transferable principle. And I think that is start with a few. Doesn't matter. Even in a larger church, you start with a few. If you're in a smaller church, you start with a few. Is it two or three? Jesus did that. He had 12, and even of the 12, he really had three, and then 12, and then 72, and then so on and so forth. And so I think that's a transferable principle, that just start with a few. And I think we're tempted sometimes to say we got to reach the masses right away and blast it out. Loved and Sent, again, is a culture and it's a way of being. And you don't do that. You can't do that like manufacturing. Loved and Sent is not a factory. It's more like agriculture, where there's planting and there's cultivating and there's growth, and it's steady and it happens, but it happens in seasons. It doesn't happen at once. Like manufacturing, you're like, I want a product churned out in 3 hours, and then we'll box it and ship it. Ministry is not like manufacturing. It's more like agriculture. And so Loved and Sent, I would view it that way too. If you're going to utilize this resource, to view it in a agricultural sense and start with a few.
Yeah, that's great. I love the idea too of all the seasons with agriculture. So relationships don't happen overnight. They're not something that gets manufactured, and there's always seasons to how people come together and what's happening in their life and how they're able to focus more on Jesus in those moments. And unfortunately for us as humans, I think sometimes we focus on Jesus whenever things aren't going so great, right? And when things are going wonderful, we think, oh yeah, no, we got this. And so just giving some time for all of that to rise to the surface and really take hold is really important. So yeah, thank you for that picture. I think that really helps people think about it differently, that it's not 6 weeks. But it is this powerful connection of your congregation, regardless of what size it is. It's the ability for all of them at the appropriate time to engage in the same thing and the same principles, the same thoughts. And if they are reading the book together, once it gets out to that outer rung and the entire congregation is reading through it at the same time, I think that there's an amazing amount of power in everybody engaging in the same thing at the same time, because then all those conversations are around the same material. It's not like, well, my Bible study is on this and yours is on that. It's like we're all engaged in the same conversation and the same growth and the same challenge. I wasn't at your church when that was happening, but I'm just envisioning in my mind that must have created a tremendous amount of energy for people and unity.
Yeah, you're making me think too, Jane, on seasons. That's a good thought. And so if I was a ministry leader right now, if you're a pastor, and it's October, you may watch this later, but right now it's October of 2023, like to almost see it in those seasons where let winter be a season of dormancy. I'm just metaphorically. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's when you're saying, hey, I've got this resource, and I just want to start with 4 or 5 of you. We're going to read through this. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
digest it personally for our own lives and then for our ministry, and think about how could this affect our church. Then in the spring, you plant seeds in the spring. So in the spring, then maybe it goes out to that next ring. Summertime, people go all over the place and whatever, but I would already be thinking about next fall would be a beautiful season to have already cultivated something so that next fall is like the church-wide initiative, 6 weeks or whatever it is. I think that makes the 6 weeks so much more effective and powerful when you've had a build up to it, when you've had people that are like, this isn't just a book we're reading, but this is actually like, it's kind of reframed my vision of my life and ministry. So you already have your early adopters so that when you come to the fall, a bunch of people are like, oh yeah, this is already part of, maybe even part of our culture a little bit. So by the time the larger group gets it, there's momentum.
Yeah, that's great. That's really good. And then I love how you capitalized on that momentum with the servant event. So it was a way to transfer all of that learning, all of that maybe churning up inside of people, to just harness that into action, and everybody going out again together to serve, to experience that. I think that there's a lot of power in that connectedness and that shared experience and those shared conversations, and then that just builds energy that, in smaller groups you can achieve it, but in the entire congregation together, it's just kind of amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I know you described that first servant event, and then the next day, the celebration event is just incredibly powerful, and especially powerful for everybody who went and put together all of the behind the scenes, like the video and the stories, and got everything ready. So like they stayed up almost half the night so that this next day, there's no momentum lost, and everybody just gets to really think about that and celebrate that, and just praise God for everything he did during that day through them for others, but also for them.
Mm-hmm.
So we had, I don't know if you knew this or not, but a month ago we had Christy Eberling, who was one of the original servant event planners on, and she was talking about it from the beginning to the end, and what an amazing event it was to plan and to think about and to just kind of get your head around for the first time. And I would imagine that it's kind of the same feeling if you're a pastor, or you're the small group leader and you're going to start it there, to just the idea of getting your head around the whole process and um, how that can change people, just in starting with their identity as being this loved child of God, period. Not a son, not a daughter, not a husband, not a wife, not a, whatever, but just a loved child of God. And I think that that's pretty powerful. I know when I read the book, I was like, wow, I feel like I've been a Christian all my life, but there were just things that in that book that really framed stuff a little bit, just framed God's love for me in unique ways that I may have heard it before, but not in that way. That there's just something very powerful about it. So just want to thank you for uh, following his leading and actually getting down all those thoughts that were swimming around in your head onto paper. I think they are going to be incredibly powerful for congregations who take up that challenge. I think also one of the really unique, maybe, but certainly one of the most beautiful things that you guys did is early on was you thought about what it would look like in the future when this really took hold. So when it went from the small to the medium to the entire congregation, when everybody was processing it and beginning to live differently, what would that look like? How would that impact each individual as a disciple of Jesus, and what would that look like for your church? And so I wanted you to spend a little bit of time helping others see sort of what that process was like when you were just dreaming, what you were aiming for.
Yeah, well, let me claim a little bit of ignorance. I don't know if it was strategic, as strategic as you're describing it. I think I always operate with, and I talked about this a few weeks ago, who before what. And so Loved and Sent is really defining who we are before kind of the strategy of what we do. So right now, this is real time. Our church is in a strategic planning process. We've kind of been through some stuff, paid off our debt. It's just a time in our church where we're thinking about what does God want next. We're sort of on one of those kind of liminal moments, those threshold seasons. And so we're going into strategic planning, which, if those of you watching, you've maybe been through strategic planning in ministry, and there's Post-it notes and Sharpies all over the place. And does anything come of it? And I'm not that I'm skeptical of strategic planning, but we want to make sure that we're doing the right things and that that's actually actionable. But what we're doing right now to get ready for that is actually talking about who we are first, then what. So we're kind of having a revisit of Loved and Sent. Kind of, what are the values? What does that look like? What is the heart of the gospel, that we are the beloved of God, and from that we are sent for mission and vocation in the world. And so grounding ourselves in that is going to help us then say, okay, now what do we do? Because it's really easy to say, what should we do next? What should we build? What programs should we start? What staff do we need? Those are all what questions. I think that'll all come. That's the tail. But the head is, who are we? Who are we? What kind of people does God want us to be? The what will follow. So we're in that right now. I'm making sure my people, before they come up with ideas of what the future looks like, that we're grounded in who we are. So I would say one thing that you get to thinking about the future. I generally lead pretty open-handed. I don't want to over-prescribe the future because that's out of my hands. So I pretty much walk into the future with open hands. Now I do kind of think about what could be, and kind of, we do have to have a destination. We're going to walk there, but we try to be clear, be defined, but also be open to course correction. One thing that I have way out, this is related to Loved and Sent, that's so far out that I don't know how we'll get there or when we'll get there. But one vision that I have is that, could our people grow so much that one day we send 10 families and $1 million to the least church city in America in order to either plant a church or help a church there in a difficult setting. So let's just say is it San Francisco or Seattle? I don't know. Sometimes they duel it out for like the least church city in America. What would it take for us now to raise a kind of people whose heart is so ready just to go, whose heart is so formed and shaped by the gospel, that we'll say, we need 10 families to relocate, to sell everything here and relocate and buy a house in Seattle. And we're going to send you with $1 million and each other, and you're going to either plant a church or you're going to help a community there, or go further out to London or to Shanghai or wherever. To me, that is like sent in the extreme. It's one thing to take mission trips. It's another thing to send the people that you love, your best leaders, and money. So you're talking about kind of vision, looking to the future. If that would be that's maybe way out. Maybe it'll take us a generation to get there. We might be raising our 5th graders to have that kind of spirit. So it's going to take a generation for them to get there. But then you back that up and say, what do we need to do now to form that kind of a heart around the gospel and mission? And so then it gets into maybe, well, there's short-term mission trips, or there's a particular um, discipleship process around scripture that forms somebody, or a worship life, or local service and engagement. All of these things then kind of back up and become things that we do now to form that kind of people. So I don't know if I answered your question at all, but I kind of look at maybe big milestones in the future, like sending people, and then I'm kind of open-handed along the way. Which route do we need to take to get there?
Yeah, that's really good. As usual, you take my little question and you give me a huge answer. It's one of the things I love about having a conversation with you. My mind is always so much more expanded when we part ways, that I have to think about it for a whole day. You always give me enough to think about for an entire day. Um, so that's really amazing. Thinking about fifth graders today and planning for this, for lack of a better term, gospel revolution, that they're not just going to grow up and settle where where their family is always settled, but that they would grow up with this expectation that God has got great plans for them, and he's going to be potentially moving them to San Francisco or London. That's that's very different than the way that I spent my childhood. I know that. But I think it's really important that we, as at every age, begin to think of ourselves as more highly mobile and more on the move, which is what I love about the, not just the loved and the identity part of your book, but the sent. So then what does that mean? What does it mean when you put it into action? It can mean helping somebody that you see every day. It can mean going out into a different part of your community and helping. It can mean going to a different state. It can mean starting something new. And I know in your church, you've said a number of times that one of the things that it has meant is that some of your very, very best volunteers have been convicted in their heart that they need to leave your congregation and start something else or be part of a church plant somewhere else. So talk a little bit about the first time that happened, and like when it really began to hit culmination of send.
Yeah, Loved and Sent developed out of kind of a particular community of our church, which is now another site. So it developed really when I was kind of doing church planting in a more urban and transitory setting. So it happened a lot that we would meet young adults who were in the city for a job or grad school, college, and we'd have them for a little while and they'd move on. So that pain hit right away in ministry. So it's like the worst church growth is the word sent. That's like horrible. Your church will never grow if you're really serious about the word sent, because you'll always be deploying. So that's why college ministry is really difficult, because there's a constant turnover. But what you're doing is you're incubating and then sending. You're investing in someone and then gifting them somewhere else, wherever they'll be someday. And that's a very selfless ministry. So a corner of our church is that we have a lot of turnover, and that's painful. Where it happened probably really first for me was a couple who was part of our original core group with that community. Dear friends, were godparents to each other's kids, and they felt convicted to move to a new church in St. Louis, and that also had a school. So the wife is a teacher. She felt called to this Christian school in the city. And with that move, that school came also the church that school is a part of. And so we knew they would have to move. Now, they're still in our metro area, but they're no longer part of our church, and we just don't see them as much. So we're still friends, but we had to send them, and that was painful. We do that with tears. And it's painful, but also there's a joy in that, because now I see what they're doing in a new community, a new church. And there's no pride of ownership. There's no control that these are my people. Loved and Sent, you have to have a very open-handed that this is something bigger. This is God's movement. And he sees across church membership lines. He sees across zip codes and parish lines. And that can be hard for us, especially as pastors or leaders, where we're just trying to maybe survive or try to do ministry, and we want the best people to be a part of that. It's hard to send some of them or lose some of them, but that's the call. I'm convicted by a story that I've heard about Antioch, the early church in Antioch. And it's a legend, it's not in scripture, but you read about Antioch in the book of Acts. And it was the hub and headquarters of Paul's missionary journeys. And we look at Antioch as sort of a loved sent church early on in the early Christian church. And there's a legend that the people in the church of Antioch would raise their sons and daughters in the spirit of St. Paul, ascending spirit, just as he deployed on his missionary journeys out of Antioch to Greece and Rome. So too, they would raise their children to be sent, and that even in the years after Paul died, they would take their sons and daughters, many of them called to be missionaries like St. Paul, and they would take them down the river to the harbor on the Mediterranean Sea, and they would load their children on ships, board ships, and send them to be missionaries to Rome or Spain or Africa. And they knew that they may never see their children again. And they would weep in the harbor because they were sending their kids in the spirit of St. Paul to be missionaries. So I think of that picture, it's a very compelling, kind of radical nature of sent. There's no plane that you can just come back home quick on furlough. But that was the spirit of those early Christians. And I think that that's compelling to us.
Wow. Yes, that's amazing. I had not heard that story before. I can only imagine how much emotion would be involved in like just sending off your kids, and who knows whether you'll see them again, but you know that what they're going to go do is amazing, and God directed.
Yeah. Well, and people do that today. And maybe there's somebody watching now. You have given up someone in your family, and maybe not in such an extreme way, but where they have gone away and lived somewhere else. And that's a call from God to do that. And yeah, it's powerful.
It is. I was listening to a webinar, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the pastor's name, but I do know that the church was in somewhere in outside of the Denver area in Colorado. And he was also very passionate about being ready to go. And he said that every member of their church, if you're going to call yourself a member of their church, had to have a active passport. So, it can't just be expired. It has to be ready.
Yeah,
so
that's good.
If God says go wherever in the world, you're ready. I remember.
I like that.
Yeah, it stuck with me. I mean, it was over a year ago that I listened to that webinar, but it really stuck with me because it just really reinforces that it's not just a theory or an idea, but that, I mean, they're serious and they expect that God is on the move and that we will be his people on the move. So a little bit different expression of sent, but same idea. Mm-hmm. For sure. And I think, one of the things that you have been so clear about as we initially sat down and talked about just the concept of loved and sent, and I hadn't read the book yet. And I was kind of, in my mind, I was kind of placing it in a program slot, if you will. It's like something that you do as a church. You decide you're going to do loved and sent. And it was really my first time to come into contact with something that is not what I mean, it is, there are things that you do, but it's the who before what, right? It's the who you are, the why you are, and then the what you would do out of that is important, and that it is not 6 weeks and done, and it is not based on solely on a book or on a sermon series, but it's just the culmination of changing hearts and minds. And so, kind of going back to the very start of our conversation today, that agricultural idea of you plant seeds, you wait for them to nurture, they can, then you harvest, and sometimes you store it, your harvest for a while, and sometimes you put it into the marketplace right away. It's so much more than a program could ever be, because it doesn't have an ending. It's a journey, and a culture that develops over time. And I think for every church, it would be a different period of time. Is that a fair statement? I mean, there is no expectation that at month 3 you should be here, or month 6 you would be here. Or am I misunderstanding that?
No, you're absolutely right. I think loved and sent, it's not rocket science. It's the gospel, the heart of the gospel of grace in Jesus Christ, and then the compelling nature of what that does to you in sending you to do really important work by the power of the Holy Spirit. And so that's all biblical stuff. That's transferable no matter what context you're in, be a Chinese church or Hispanic church, small, large, West Coast, Midwest. But you're right, what you're saying contextually, each community looks different and has different culture and different timelines. And so I hope that it's a useful resource, but I think it can be applied various timelines and in various ways. And that's actually, I'm kind of interested too, to always see where Loved and Sent takes root in a local community and to see how it plays out, because I always find it that God uses it in different ways in different places.
Absolutely. Well, we're also uniquely made, right? And so he can orchestrate a lot of things because we're not all exactly the same. Yeah, no, that's really good. I know it's been quite a while, so this may not be a really fair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, and you can just tell me if it's not fair. If you take yourself back 10 years ago, when, or whatever period of time that was, where the congregation, where you had gone from your inner circle and the small groups and into the entire congregation, and then that very first servant event. So it was well known and starting to be lived out throughout your entire congregation. Obviously, some people would that would catch a spark inside of them, and they would just be on fire and looking for their next way to serve. And others would be like, wow, that was really fun. That was really great. When are we going to do that again? And until then, I'll wait, right? I love doing it in community, but I'm not necessarily ready to start doing that on my own yet. And maybe that'll always be the case, but how long would you say it was before the spirit that you felt whenever you walked into your church, like you could say to yourself, I feel that spirit, like people know they're loved and they're really living out that love. We're happier, we're more at peace. I don't know how to describe that exactly, but how long before you really started to see that change? We'll just go with the main campus of Christ Memorial.
Yeah, well, no church is perfect, and there's always we always continue to struggle in our identity and purpose. So it's never like you arrive and finally this is happening, but you can mark and measure when culture begins to take root, when there's a sense of the gospel is being integrated in an authentic and powerful way in people's lives, and you're seeing an expression of it. So I think as a pastor, you can kind of see that happen. So I don't know, I think even within a year, this isn't just like 6 weeks, but in a year, people were saying, oh, I kind of see this, where people could make it their own language. Maybe after a couple of years, and it's different in our case because initially people may have seen it as my thing. So, oh, Pastor Jeff's loved and sent thing. But I'd say after a couple of years, it was like, no, this is our thing. It's not just Pastor Jeff, it's our thing. Longer, and I don't want to discourage anybody, but I think if you're watching this, you recognize that longer tenures and things over time, again, in season and out of season, they begin to take root. So, 10 years in, and I would say right now in our church, it's just the culture. And we're seeing it in ways that are far beyond any pastor or leader's control, as the gospel should be, as the Spirit of God is. But sometimes it just takes time for things to work through. So I'll give you an example. This was our 10th year of our Loved Sent Servant event, which is kind of our one-day mini mission trip, the servant event.
Mm-hmm.
And so we do that one Saturday, gather a bunch of people, there's energy, we deploy, and it's great. We love it. But what I've always wanted is where that takes root in someone's life. What we do on one day, people would do on every day. So after a few years, I found out that a guy named Jerry and Bill, two members of our church, they had gone to a soup kitchen in our city. And I found out later that they went back and started doing it weekly. Every week, like 50 weeks a year, they would show up and be on the rotation to serve the homeless out of this food kitchen in the city, out of an alley, out of a church, out of their back alley. They just serve the homeless. It becomes a regular thing. So Jerry and Bill did that every week. Now, Jerry just died 2 weeks ago. So people at the homeless place, they're wondering, where's Jerry? Because they've gotten to know him over a number of years. So for Jerry, a man of few words, when he spoke, you listened because he didn't speak much, but he knew he could do something with his hands, with his time, and he did it. And so that to me would be a sense of, that takes time and it becomes culture, it becomes normative. When would this loved and sent dynamic not just be a program, but when does it become norming in your community? And again, like I'm saying, it just takes time. I'm not going to comfort you with a silver bullet. Read this book and it'll all be okay. But hopefully this book can be useful in building something that happens over time. And I look at it sort of like a river that it takes a lot of work to divert a river or a stream, to dam it up and move it. I mean, that takes a lot of work, but once you do it and that river starts moving and growing, it becomes normative. The water just follows the natural path. And so in some ways, again, we are not a perfect church. We've got a lot of flaws, but we are in a season where we're sort of just in a river that's moving, and we don't have to fight like a reverse current. Things are just moving because we've established this is who we are. Nobody is arguing with our basic values. Everybody is grounded in loved and sent. So if there's any arguments in our church, now it's about what do we do with that? That's where the tension will be in our people. They're going to argue about, what should we do with that? But nobody is arguing basic values. And to me, that's the worst in a church, where you're just arguing over fundamental values. People just see ministry and life differently. So loved and sent has been sort of our compass and our guide in that. And that just took time to invest in.
Yeah. Oh, that's really a beautiful illustration of but not only faith in action with the two gentlemen, but also just the idea that I mean, who hasn't been in a voters meeting where there's more tension around like the values than there is like the specifics, and to get past that so that it's all around the same energy. I mean, we're humans, we're never going to have 100% agreement. I don't think. I've never been a part of that. But to start from the same place, to know that the values are the same. And so as as visitors come, I'm certain that from their perspective, the spirit that they feel among the people has to be different. That's really a beautiful, beautiful thing. And as you said, that didn't start out on day one, but it has grown and become the case. And as you guys look towards the future and your next steps, it's a beautiful place to step off from, that everybody has the same values. And now you can talk about how big the plans are going to be and how you're going to achieve them. It's exciting.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot more to how you move everybody together and keep the momentum rolling. And some of those things I'd love to pick up on next time when we meet in January, which will be the next time we have a Loved and Sent webinar. So it'll be sort of like Pastor Jeff Part 1 and Pastor Jeff Part 2. How lucky are we? So anyway, it's always a pleasure, obviously, to have you with us, but I'm really looking forward to next time as well, when we can talk about some things, the more practical things, like I know you do some work with all of your visitors who might want to become members, and just making sure that that culture just is infused in everybody who becomes associated with your church. And so we'll talk more about that in January. Our conversation will be Wednesday, January 24th in 2024. That's a lot of 24s. Thank you so much for carving out the time to be with us today, Pastor Jeff. It's always such a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, Jane. My pleasure.